of parenting. And as I get things dialed in here, we're going to look today at the consistent need to always be parenting. It never stops. It's always going to be there. I wish I could tell you something else, but that just simply is not the case. Instead, we need to be consistent. And today, the good news is from David's psalm that even in the midst of the ugly days of parenting, and they do come and go, God's presence is always going to be consistent with us. And so the real thing we're going to look at is how to make sure that we understand with our children, not only is God consistent with us, but how are we going to be consistent parents? How are we going to be always consistent parents? And the first thing that comes to mind is the need continually and always for encouragement. You see, parenting is not just going to quick fix thing that happens overnight. As I said last Sunday, there's no real sure plan or one way to parent. When we shovel or snow blow, it's pretty simple. You get out there, you remove the snow, and then it snows again, and you just keep doing it. But with parenting, it throws curveballs all the time. It's never just one path. I can remember when my son John graduated from high school, and then that June he left for college. That wasn't that June. Maybe it seems like that June. Anyway, he left in October or August. It was August for college. And he was gone. And then into the fall, people would come up to us in the church, because Kelly and I now had no one at home, at least that fall, and they would say, "So, how does it feel to be empty nesters finally?" And I just smiled and said, "Okay." But in my head I'm thinking, we're not empty nesters. That kid's in college, man. He's coming back, I'm telling you. They come back. And they come home and they nest. They nest right in the room. There's no such thing as an empty nester. We never stop expecting our children to show up. We know that. We can all share stories of the fact that it never, ever ends. But the one thing that we can do in the consistent presence of parenting is remind ourselves our kids always need encouragement. I have yet to meet a child, I mean this, or an adult, that has said to me, "The one thing I wish, Pastor, is my parents or people would stop encouraging me. I've had so much encouragement that I can't take it anymore. I want to be put down. I don't want any more encouragement. I've had too much encouragement." It just doesn't work. Our kids always need encouragement. Our people always need encouragement. We're always battling self-esteem. We're always battling that need for confidence. And you know what the worst part of it is, and I'm sure that Carrie can testify in youth ministry to this, but I have met young people who have gotten so little encouragement, and we see this in daily ministry, that they've just come to life by the time they hit the middle school years and high school years, that they just live through life expecting negative encouragement. In fact, I've encouraged some young people that are in that type of life, and I hit them with encouragement, and they don't know what to do about it. They just kind of stare at me blankly because they are so not used to positive encouragement. And so with that help of David's psalm, while he's being chased across the hills of Israel by Saul's army, I want to look at some ways to help encourage our children. The first thing is, whatever we do when we encourage our children, see it and say it positively. See it and say it positively. Now, the problem with this is every time that we want to encourage our children, we would like some feedback, wouldn't we? I mean, every time we encourage our children, the one thing we want as parents is, "Oh, that was really good that you said that, Mom and Dad. Thank you. I get it. That's really cool." But we don't get the feedback we want sometimes. In fact, we don't get the feedback for years. In fact, sometimes we check out right around the certain seasons of life, and we don't get feedback until they're about 35, 40 years old. And, oh, finally, okay? But we keep doing it. I remember one Halloween, John was about 5 or 6 years old, and Kelly was working with John on a Halloween costume, and they were upstairs for what seemed like a long time before we were going to go trick-or-treating. It was probably about 45 minutes, but it seemed like 4 or 5 hours. And Kelly came downstairs first, and she had her finger pointed at me and said, "Now John's coming down, and don't say anything negative about his costume." And John came down, he was all wrapped up like a mummy, and I just looked at him and I'm like, "That looks really cool, John. That's going to be awesome tonight." And he sits down on the bottom step and says, "I look like a nerd." Well, he kind of did, but I didn't want to say that. Because Kelly said don't. We don't get the feedback we want when we compliment our children. But we still do it anyway. Because our children are dependent on that compliment need. And so we see it and we say it positively because it builds up confidence. I remember one child was in high school and got another ear piercing, and she already had a nose piercing. And the mother looked as she was going to school one morning and said, instead of complimenting what she really thought of the nose piercing and the eye piercing, the ear piercing, and she just said, "Oh, nice ear piercing. It matches your nose piercing." And the daughter just steamed out, "Whatever." But we still compliment, don't we? David is in the midst of these hills and these caves, and he's being chased by an army, the greatest army in the world, because God has ordained him to be the next king. But the human being side of that is, I'm scared. And he needs that compliment that God has already put in him as a young child, and his parents have put in him when he was being raised on their sheep farm, their ranch. David says, "Now my head is lifted up above my enemies all around me." You see why kids need compliments? All around me, my enemies. And I will offer in God's tent, in his tent, sacrifices and shouts of joy. We need compliments because we're going to get in trouble. And when we get in trouble, we tell Mom and Dad, "Thank you for the compliments," because they're going to help us when we're sitting there with our enemies surrounding us. Those compliments give us the ability to still shout to God for joy. "And I will sing and I make melody to the Lord." We can't compliment our kids enough. Now, I'm not talking about spoiling our kids. Don't go there. That's not what there's a big difference between that and this. Consequences require actions. And we have to take care of that. But we still compliment. Not only do we see it and say it, but say it beyond the moment. And this is really important. It took me a long time to figure this out. All too often, when we compliment right in the moment, right there. And what happens is the children, as children, we get caught up in thinking that's what we're going to do for our moment. That's going to be it. Okay? I can remember when I was ski racing. And I was in high school, and I was racing competitively at different ski resorts, and we had a downhill race team and all this going on, and I was racing for the local ski resort and all that. And my dad, my mom, but especially my dad, would come out and watch me and tell me I did good. But I also began to think, because I actually won a few races, very little, but I won a few. I began to think in my head, I'm going to be an Olympic skier. Yeah, you can laugh. It's okay. See how well that worked out. But I was winning. I was like, I can be an Olympic skier. And if my dad would have complimented me every time I won a ski race, what would have happened in my head? I would have thought, I'm going to be an Olympian. But instead, my dad complimented me when I was ski racing on how I stuck it out, how I stayed with it, how I kept going after it, because further down the line in life, he would say, there's something you're going to do, and it's going to be really good and godly, and this is going to help you. Let me see if I can be a little more clear. We live in a world where professional athletes are everything. To be quite honest with you, they're too much. We live in a world where sports have taken over what used to be our religion in such a way that now traveling teams and sports and everything have become our religion. We live in a world sometimes where we compliment the child on the sport and we make them think they're going to be Division I athletes, and the reality is that just doesn't happen. I know it can happen to very few, but very few. And what I'm trying to say is, instead of complimenting our children on just the moment of that home run, or just the moment of that great piano solo, or just the moment of that great dance, we can say, you know what, that dance was wonderful because it's going to help you someday explode for God and what it is you're going to do for God. And you may help people dance someday in whatever God has for you. And I always want to be there watching you explode in whatever you explode in. Because it is wonderful. Instead of putting just the moment of life into our children, compliment our children in ways that build them up completely for the future. David's hiding and he's in trouble. Do not hide your face from me, God. This is when the confidence of those compliments is needed in the eyes of child as they come young adults. Do not hide your face from me. Do not turn your servant away in anger. In other words, God, don't give up on me. You have been my help. Do not cast me off. Do not forsake me, O God. O God of my salvation. You know what the difference between that verse and complimenting just for the moment? God says, hey, David, you were a good athlete. You took Goliath down with one stone. But there's so much more to your life than that moment you took Goliath down. And I am going to help you do that and see that beyond just the moment of the compliment. So when you're in trouble, I'm there for you. Say it beyond the moment. And I can see some of that now as I work with my own child, as he is in the midst of youth ministry, and we talk about how tough ministry can be, not just when he's 25 years old, but way beyond that down the road. And how we need to be in it for the long haul and have the faith and the discipline to stay in it. Finally, as I get to closing it up, and this is really important, parents, be genuine about a compliments. Now let me explain what that means. Not only do we see it and say it, not only do we say it beyond the moment, but we say it with real, genuine feelings. Okay? I am the first one to admit I'm not a hugger. I'm not. Okay? I shake my mom's hand. Sometimes I high-five her. No, I do hug her. But I'm not a hugger. Man, you know, in the United Methodist Church, I'm not making this up, there's an actual worship service, and I know what some of you are thinking. There's an actual worship service that used to be practiced in England by John Wesley Discipline called a love feast. Literally called a love feast. You have communion and you hug everyone. I promise you, I'm not doing a love feast here, okay? I know some of you are huggers. That's fine. That's great. But there are times where we hug our children with compliments because they need it. They need it. They're staring at us and they need it. I can think of how many times, as much as I'm not a hugger and I run from that, my son looked at me and it's after a football game or something, or maybe it was after the last game. I remember it was the last game of his football season of his senior year. And it was hard because that was done for him. He was moving on to college. That chapter was done. And all he wanted to do was get a hug. I remember Kelly hugging him first, and it wasn't a good season that year. They had lost a lot of games. And then me hugging him because he wanted a hug. Parents, if our kids don't get hugs from us, they're going to go somewhere else and get it. And you know what I'm talking about. And that's the last place we want our children to go. We need to, at times, hug. I can remember John looking at me one time in the middle of high school, and I was in the school for coaching or whatever, and I saw him, and the last thing he said was, "Dad, you're not going to hug me here, are you?" And yes, I wanted to just to do it, but I thought, forget it. But there are times when we have to be genuine, and we want to be genuine with our children. And we want to hug them, because they need that hug, and they're going to need it as they grow up. I can think of how many times, my dad was not a hugger at all, but I can think of how many times when I needed that hug, he was there and he hugged me, or he looked at me and he grabbed my hand and he said, "I'm proud of you." And it was genuine. David, again, in this psalm, is in trouble because he needs that confidence of seeing it and saying it, going beyond the moment and hugging and be genuine about it. Do not give me up to the will of my adversaries. If we don't hug our children, they're going to go somewhere else and find it. For false witnesses have risen against me, and they are breathing out violence. There are times when our children need more than just a statement. They need the genuineness of touch and feel from us as parents in that compliment. And those are the times we give it to them, because they're counting on us, and we don't want them to go somewhere else for it. So as we are in the midst of this parenting, I bring it to a close on that.